And good morning. We're live. Welcome to Spec Women Chat. Our topic today is speculative romance, and I'm really excited. I have such a great panel here today, and I can't wait to get into this conversation. I'm going to get them to introduce themselves, starting to the left of my screen with Courtney.
Hi guys, my name is Courtney Cannon. I am the owner of Fiction Atlas Press. We publish lots of speculative fiction, lots of YA fiction. We're doing some anthologies. I'm also an author. You can find me at clcannon.net. I've got some short stories that have come out, and then my brand new debut novel is coming out in August, and then I've got a novella that's kind of connected to that world coming out in June or July. So that's me.
Awesome. Welcome. Courtney will not say this in her own bio, but I added it because I think it's true. Courtney has a small press that she has built from being involved actively in the indie community for quite some time, and she is a pillar of the community to a lot of people. So I'm very glad to have her here.
Thank you.
And then Catherine.
Hi, my name's Catherine Acero. I'm a science fiction writer. I include a lot of romantic elements in my science fiction. They tell me I'm the first person who was ever nominated for a Rita for a science fiction book from a major science fiction publisher rather than a romance. I don't know if that's true or not, but the people who told me about it thought it was. I've won the Nebula a couple times. I have about 25 books out. I guess to me, the romantic elements are always an integral part of the story. And I enjoy writing them. I guess that's enough.
Well, welcome. I'm so glad you could make it. I was very excited when I heard that you were willing to do the panel, so thank you.
Thank you.
And then we have Jeffy.
Hi, I'm Jeffy Kennedy. I'm a newer writer than Catherine, but Catherine actually helped me way back when, a few years ago, with my first published novel. I write fantasy, I write contemporary and erotic romance, and then I also write fantasy romance. And one of my fantasy romance books won the Rita last year. So I am a member of both RWA and of SFWA. I'm a director at large on the board of SFWA. And right now I am finishing the third book in a high fantasy trilogy for Rebel Base Books. And then I'm a hybrid author, so I'm also working on my self-published continuation of the 12 Kingdoms and Uncharted Realms books. And I also need to turn in a book for a brand new series and trilogy that I'm doing for St. Martin's Press. And that'll be a fantasy romance that comes out next summer, the first of the three.
Welcome. Jeffy sent me quite an impressive resume. When I asked her for a bio, I did not have room to put it all in the video description, but she has written a lot of stuff that is relevant to this field, and I really urge you to check out her website and her social media and see everything she's done, which is awesome, and thank you so much. And now we have Judith, who's a real trooper. She's coming to us from Western Australia at what's got to be after 2 a.m. there now, right?
Yes, just. Yeah, hello. Oh, right. Oh, telephone. I'm Judith Rook and live in Western Australia. I'm just so glad I wasn't the first to be introduced, because I'm so impressed by the achievements of everybody else on the panel. Absolutely incredible. I haven't, I've written a lot, but I haven't published very much. I have a couple of science fiction books on Amazon, Smashwords, but and a novella, all science fiction, but I haven't published in the print world, which eventually I'd like to. I have 3 books waiting, completed, and I will be getting them out to agents, but I don't really enjoy marketing my work.
Me neither.
So I don't know.
It's true for all of us.
Oh, I'm sure, but I think it would be better if and when I get out into the print area, which I would like to do. But meanwhile, I write a great deal. I enjoy it. And I must say that the 2 books that are independently published began as romances and ended up as science fiction. So I find that a bit curious, and I think it's what Catherine said earlier. There is romance. There's a lot of romance in my books, but they are essentially speculative fiction, which I enjoy. So that's me.
Thank you so much for being part of the panel today, Judith. Her book, Planet Woman, is going to be part of the On the Horizon book bundle, which is coming out on the 1st of May. And I also have a book in that book bundle. So I'm very excited about that. I can't wait to read your book. I'm really looking forward to it.
Well, I hope you enjoy it. I worked hard on it, and I got it through the Books Go Social selection process and got a gold sticker for it for technical excellence. So the content is not assessed, just whether you've written it and edited it properly.
Right. Neat. I don't know how to feel about technical awards. I guess, I mean, like, I'd be honored to receive one, but I would be like, yeah, okay, but are you going to read it? You know?
Well, that is exactly the question. Yeah, I want you pay for it.
That's
but
right.
You don't always get gold.
So, and then last but definitely not least, we have Krista.
Hi, everyone. I'm Krista Deball. I'm Canadian. As if you heard before we logged in, I was talking about how horrible the weather is where I live. I'm the author of, I just blanked. I'm the author of 20 books as of July. I can't remember any of the titles. Wow. I just blanked. I'm the author of What Kings Ate and Wizards Drank, a fantasy lover's food guide, and Harlots, Hustlers, and Heroes, a steampunk adventure field guide. I write science fiction, fantasy. It's coming to me now. I write science fiction, fantasy, historical nonfiction. I've written a what I jokingly refer to as the rural fantasy set. It's kind of a paranormal romance set in Newfoundland. It comes with a map to show you where that is. And I've actually written pure romances as well. So
that is so fantastic. I'm very pleased to have another Canadian on the panel. That's fun. I'm so glad you could make it. Thank you so much. I got in touch with Krista seems months ago now. So she's been very patient, and I'm really glad that she's here. Please do check out her website for her work as well. So much of it sounds so interesting. I'm going to read your food book, your fantasy food book. That sounds really cool.
You also can read my endless essays on Reddit. I write essays about every month on our fantasy. My last one was called Revisiting Joanna Russ.
Nice. I can't wait to read that. That's cool. All right, so speculative romance. So, okay, why I thought this would be a good panel to do is that most genre fiction writers feel that their work is often marginalized, science fiction and fantasy being no exception, but romance is uniquely marginalized, I think, and I wonder how much of that is connected to sexism, because it tends to be viewed as primarily a women's genre, although I would definitely argue that's not the case. I used to have a negative opinion of romance, which I picked up from the people around me mostly, right? And then I read Jude Devereaux, and I read this book by a wonderful lady. It's backwards, but it's A Civil Campaign by Lois McMaster Bujold, who is known primarily as a space opera writer. This is part of that space opera series, the Vorkosigan Saga, which is, I'm a big fan. I'm sure I've said that on the show before. So I was like, well, love is one of the big reasons that people do things, right? This is one of our big motivators, and I think often they're intrinsic to the plot and important. But if we declare that romance is the plot, we end up getting marginalized, right? A case in point, this is a romance novel. I'm reading this right now. This is David Weber. The book is At All Costs. It's part of his Honor Harrington series, which I'm also a big fan of. And in this particular book, the main plot is centered around a romantic relationship that the title character, Honor, is involved in, right? And there's explosions and there's a war going on and there's all kinds of technical space battles, but the plot is the romance. And I think that's great. He's been setting this up for the past 5 books at least. He would not be acknowledging the character's integrity if he didn't see that to fruition and trace what's going to happen with that relationship. So awesome, but why is that space opera, right? And other things are considered to be romance. And I don't know. I'd love to hear anybody's thoughts about any of that, about feeling marginalized, about what qualifies as romance. Who wants to start?
Well, I can start if you'd like. When my books first came out about, it's been over 20 years now. I had never heard of the romance genre. And I started getting email from romance readers saying, oh, thank you for writing a good science fiction book that's also romance. Because my first book was kind of Romeo and Juliet in outer space, but with a happy ending. But it was also hard science fiction, and it was marketed as hard SF, very deliberately by my publisher. By hard SF, I mean science fiction that is very intentionally and deliberately grounded in a lot of science. I mean, I neep on about science in the book in various places. And when I started talking about the email I was getting from romance readers, I said, well, I went and read some of the romance genre. For example, Mary Jo Putney, who I love her work. A lot of other writers, also I found Lois too, of course, whose work I loved. And I said, I had no idea this genre existed. I'm going to talk about it at at science fiction panels. And my publisher said, no. And I said, why not? And they basically said what you said. He said, look, you have to understand they're 2 different audiences. If you talk about it as romance, you're going to turn off a potential audience. And it was hard for me not to. I mean, I ended up doing it anyway. And they were right. I did turn off some potential readers who I think to this day probably don't take me seriously as a hard science fiction writer because, I was never abashed or at all shy about talking about the fact that I had a large romance crossover. However, what we discovered, and I think pleased my publisher, was that the sales went up. And the reason they went up is because the romance audience is a lot bigger than the science fiction audience. You probably know, I think Jeffy, you told me this one time, the statistics for how much of the paperback and the fiction market is romance, and it's larger substantially than the portion that's science fiction. So in the end, it worked out okay because there's a very large audience for romance too. But I think now that this has become a movement, so to speak, and a lot of very respected writers, including this panel, are writing, crossover fiction, it's not as much of a stigma as it used to be. And we've worked hard to make that happen, with panels like this one. But yeah, sure. In the beginning, especially, there were people who would not even come to my panels or take me seriously at all as a writer, and who said I would be gone in, by the end of the year, just because I said, yeah, I write science fiction that has romance in it. Hard SF that has romance, nuts and bolts and explosions. They were thinking of me following in the Honor Harrington kind of tradition. Nuts and bolts and explosions and romance. But it worked out.
I find it very hard to separate the two. It's romance is the what we call romance is what holds the storyline together. It's not the central theme. There are other themes as well, but it's the cement for me. The relationship between people, the emotional relationship between people. And also this brings in the villains as well. So I'm quite happy to be classified as a romance writer, so long as I can keep my hands also on the science fiction. Mine tends to be space opera, but also I've written a couple of hard science fiction books as well. But again, it's people getting on with each other, trying to understand each other. And somehow that's easier to do if you're looking into the romance genre.
I don't disagree with any of that. I think you're absolutely right. Anybody else?
Well, I can just say that, like, one of the things that I've noticed is that there is a huge reader need. So from the reader perspective, there's a huge group of readers who are desperate for fantasy adventure, who are desperate for hard science, who are desperate for contemporary fantasy and near future science fiction. But they also want relationships, and they want romance, and they want people who start off hating each other and end up as Elizabeth Bennet and Darcy by the end of the series. And I don't think I think that sometimes as a group, science fiction and fantasy has mistreated those people, those readers, and disrespected them. I still see it where some of our own authors have actually insulted those readers publicly. I attended I got to be careful so that way I don't say who it is, but I attended a talk once where one of the keynote speakers laughed at romance readers in a group that had in front of us romance writers as a part of this event.
Wow.
And I don't think, and that was not, I'm not that old, so it wasn't that long ago. And I think that we need to be very careful in our own genre to not be dissing anybody else anyways. That's just rude. But B, we also, within our own world, we have people who actually want that. So
it's a huge audience.
Yes, I think that we're actually doing ourselves a disservice by not actually exploring what's out there, what we want to do, and what other people want us to do. And to answer the original questions, I absolutely believe it's steeped in sexism. Yeah. I've written 2 essays on it. You know, it's cool.
Well, I can chime in some too, that I was a member of RWA before I was a member of SFWA, and I grew up reading both romance and fantasy and science fiction. And I have a graduate degree in a hard science in neurophysiology. And to me, there was never a division between those things that the world seems to create. And more than one person has said to me that one reason that the science fiction and fantasy writers like to kick at romance is because it means they're not the bottom genre, as you brought up at the beginning. And I think I've also seen a number of women fantasy writers that I've been on panels with hastening to proclaim, and what Catherine said kind of reminded me of this. You'll say, oh, no, I don't write romance, because I think they feel like they have to legitimize what they write by declaiming romance, as if that somehow makes them too girly. At the same time, the point about the romance audience being enormous, and I went ahead and pulled up some statistics from RWA while Catherine was talking. For 2015, the share of the US fiction market, 34% of it was romance. That's across all media, and that's twice as big as the next 2 biggest genres combined. So, courting the romance readers is, fiscally wise. There are also voracious readers who are passionate. And there are also very smart readers who will pass along recommendations. They have a loyalty that I find is unmatched in any other genre. So the disdain is something of a mystery, but I will agree that it does come down from the publishers. And I've certainly encountered that from time to time. And when I referenced earlier that Catherine really helped me early on, and I don't know if you remember this, Catherine, but she read my first book, and she said, well, you're a really good writer, and this is a really good story, but you're writing cross-genre, and it's going to be like wading through hip-deep snow to go in the direction you're going. And she said, don't stop. Just know that it's going to be a lot of work. And you're absolutely right, Catherine. It was a huge amount of work.
Yeah, but you succeeded.
But I did it. Yes. Woo. And so that was a huge thing for me when I got the Rita last year for my very, very cross-genre fantasy romance, because, you know, what that does is it interweaves the two arcs. And I think that that's one reason why readers really love the combination of science fiction and fantasy romance, because we have this generation of women who, you know, grew up very well educated and planning to have careers, well educated in math and science, but who also love to have an emotional, exciting journey that centers the heroine. I mean, that's the thing is I write the hero's journey, but it belongs to the heroine. And part of her self-actualization has to do with, you know, finding love, finding someone who will support her in what she's doing. And I think that's a huge thing for women.
And, you know, I think there's a lot of men who enjoy it too, if it's, you know, also science fiction that's their preferred genre. Because I'd say about half my readers are male. And I think, you know, if the cover looks like a romance cover, it's actually that more than the story itself. If it's written in the science fiction style, that is, you know, maybe off-putting for potential members of the audience. There's a very distinct difference in the style of a romance novel prose and science fiction novel prose. It used to be greater, and I've noticed that it's not as far apart now as it used to do, especially for the single title, you know, or big science fiction, you know, single title romance or the major science fiction books. You know, good writing is good writing, but there is a difference in style. And I think you have to respect both styles, both genres in order to cross over. If you look with disdain on either one, your books won't cross over as well because it comes out in the way that it's written.
I feel better listening to you guys. Okay, so I'm writing a fantasy space opera series called The Toy Soldier Saga. I've had a couple of things published in it. One of the first ones was in this book, which Courtney spearheaded. She published this. This is the first product from her publishing company, and it's a mixed bag. It's a space opera, planetary romance fantasy with erotica elements. And yes, I felt a bit like I'm slugging uphill, and I've been wondering, is it me? You know, am I a lousy writer? Like, what's going on here? But if you, like you say, it's an uphill battle. Okay, I feel better.
But it's worth the effort.
I just wanted to say that I've talked a lot about how I have a fairly core female audience, but I have a core audience of men over 60. And there is men who are desperate for adventure and romance. There aren't many Westerns out anymore. And that's where men got their romances, because those Westerns were great. And so there's still a core group of men who are looking for it. It's like Catherine went and said, there are still men who want to read it too. And it's the cover for a lot of times that are putting them off. But they're out there. They want to read it. Guys, I'm here for you.
I think the cover's a very important element, and I'm just thinking about the old the covers for the space story magazines. And always there was a scantily clad woman, crouching at the knee or something in that regard, of the armored heroic male figure. So the cover was obviously intended to link the two sexes in a relationship, although the relationship might have been a little sus to us now. But it was there. The linking between the two people in a deeply emotional sense is part of the romance presentation.
Yeah.
I think Courtney's been trying to say something over there.
I was going to say, I can relate to not wanting to kind of label yourself as a romance author, because I've kind of fought against that for a while. I'm like, oh, I wrote a short story. It's got a little bit of romance in it, but I'm really a fantasy author, or, you know, something like that. You kind of feel pressured like you have to be one or the other instead of both at the same time, because, again, there is that sort of, I don't know exactly what to call it, but people have this vision of romance in their head, and I think a lot of times it goes to like 50 Shades of Grey and things like that, and more sexual relationships than relationships of love. But if you look at pretty much any story ever written, no matter if it's romantic love, familial love, or just friendship, that's the core of almost every story ever written. And I think it's good for us to explore that, and I love being able to add that element in. And it doesn't, like we've said before, it doesn't necessarily have to be the whole plot of the story, but if you write something without that, it kind of feels like you're lying. You're not being true to life.
Yeah, I like that idea. Yes, it's an important part of life.
And I think it's true what you said, that the seeds were always in science fiction. I mean, what's one of the most basic popular plot lines of science fiction? Boy meets girl, boy gets girl, boy loses girl, boy goes out and saves the universe, boy gets girl back. Right? You know, it's always been there. But what we wanted was girl meets boy, girl goes out and saves the universe, girl and boy have lots of fun adventures. I mean, it's a different slant on it. And I think for a long time there was assumption that the main audience for these kind of stories was young men who then, you know, grew up and became adults and continued to look for audiences. You know, the explosion in YA science fiction for girls has put to rest the idea that they don't want to also, you know, read these adventure stories. And it's only in recent years, when I first wrote Catch the Lightning, which has been described by some groups as a classic science fiction romance. At the time, it was a novel told from a 17-year-old girl's first-person point of view, which is very common now. A lot of, you know, YA fiction's written that way. There were two reasons that they thought it wouldn't go. One was because the protagonist was female. It was first person from a female point of view. And the other was because she was only 17. And believe it or not, only 20, maybe it's been 25 years ago, they said to me, no one wants to read science fiction from the first person point of view of a 17-year-old girl. And I don't know how much of that was sexism. I suspect there was certainly an element in there. It was at the time believed by marketing to be true, and probably believed by a substantial portion of the science fiction field. So just in that short amount of time, you know, there's been an explosion in the way we perceive it. And I think a lot of that is exactly because the roots were always there of the interactions. And think about it for a second, it makes sense. Hard SF is about solving problems. You have a MacGuffin. You have a problem that needs to be solved, whether it's, you know, the fall of the empire, or how do I get out of this situation without dying from lack of air? You know, it's always a problem. Well, working out the romance is a problem too. It's just from the emotional side. And I think that was inherent always in the genre. We're just bringing it forward a lot more now.
I can't believe they said that to you, by the way, because Podcane of Mars. Like, seriously.
But it was written with a slant, with the idea that the readers were primarily male. I made no bones about mine. It was written about the girl, for the girl. You know, it was, I think I was born a feminist. I don't even think about it. It just comes out in my work. And, you know, I don't think they were being unreasonable. You know, they worked with me to find, you know, see how we would reach our audience. You know, they tried. They were willing to take a chance on me. But, you know, it had to be considered.
I'm always a little bit bemused by the question of what about the male readers? Because I do have guys who read my books, and they're charming and wonderful, and I appreciate them greatly. But we also know that the overwhelming number of fiction readers are female. So I wonder sometimes if that question doesn't come up as like, well, sure, you have all of these female readers, but, you know, what about the guys? As if there's an inherent validation in men reading your books, you know, and I don't think that that's necessarily true. I don't feel like I need to have male readers to feel good about what I write.
Well, in science fiction, though, the assumption, even as recent as 20, 25 years ago, was that the readership was primarily male.
Yes, but is that really true?
Oh, no, I think everybody realized now it's not.
It's not, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. We like it too.
It's just like the question of, you know, like what people keep saying with YA, where is the YA for the boys? You know, there's all these boys out there crying for books that we're not supplying to them.
Just
Go ahead, Courtney. Sorry. Yeah, and then Krista. Okay, no,
I didn't have anything.
Okay, sorry, I thought you were trying to speak. Go ahead, Krista.
No, I have to keep my mic mute just so everyone knows, because I keep coughing. So that's why I have to put my hand up so that I can know.
Yeah.
No, just to say what Jeffy said, like I absolutely agree completely. One of the things that's interesting, because I write these essays about how we recommend books and how we review books and those types of things, and as my section of the community. And one of the things in reply that I often get is, yes, but those statistics about the female readers is just because they're all reading romance and we don't care about them. And I'm like, well, no, we do care about them, but also that's not true. Hi, everybody, let's put up our hands. We're reading it. And then they get angry and go, well, no, I don't want to read the books for you. I only want to read the books written for me. And then I'm like, I actually think, I think that while that is an important statement, at the same time, there's a half of us who have all been reading stuff that was never written for us, and yet we've still read it and enjoyed it and found things that we love. And I think that that has to be recognized and understood, that we're trying to now offer books that are written for everybody, that we're trying to offer books that are written for women, by women, about women. We're trying to write books that, we're still writing books that are by men, for men, about men. You know, we're still doing that too. We're just trying to be, I think I lost a man in there somewhere, but we're trying to be more open about it, and we're not being ashamed about it as well. And personally for me, I have gotten a lot of backsplash about it. So it's been really frustrating because I don't think it's, I think that anytime we try to grow and move forward, we end up, sorry, I'm getting an echo here and it's hard to, we end up, I'm going to turn on my volume. We end up into this cycle where we try to move ahead, and then there's some people who are so threatened by it, they bombard us, and like, that's been really frustrating for me. But at the same time, Jeffy's right. We have to move forward, and we need to recognize that going on.
My MC's a guy in that series. Just saying. Why? Just because that was the character, right? So I'm not writing specifically for women, right? And I'm writing for people, right? But women are included in those people. You know, I think that I don't know, like I I think, but I agree with you, right? I agree with you that there's been a lot of like, okay, a lot of the classic science fiction, in particular classic space opera, that is all about the, you know, hero male specifically, very clearly going forward and doing his thing. And I could be inspired by those stories. I read them all. I love Heinlein, you know, I love it all. So I don't understand myself either why it's so difficult to empathize with the opposite gender when I've been doing it my whole life. Why is that hard? I don't, you know, Honor Harrington, right? Okay. She's an action hero. She's tougher than hell. Like, I don't understand why you could just, oh, well, she's a girl, so I don't like her. But maybe it's because, I don't know, maybe she gets more space because she's a girl written by a male author. I'm not sure what the deal is with that, but, you know, like, I don't hear a lot of backlash against her, so why not? It makes me suspicious. It makes me wonder.
Well, I think she's very identifiable as a heroic protagonist in a military space opera context. Whereas if you're writing a 17-year-old girl or a woman who's not heroic in that sense, she's the girl who was always the girlfriend, right? She was the side character. By moving her in the position of the major character and writing it with that sensibility in mind, I think that's where it becomes more a matter of needing to be able to do, as you say, what we've always done, those of us who've read science fiction since we were kids, which is learn how to empathize with the protagonist of the opposite sex. And it's easier to do when, I mean, Honor Harrington, who wouldn't like her? You know, she's, you know, everything that we enjoy in a science fiction hero. You know, if your hero is someone who is more traditional or not as easily identifiable in that context, I think that's where some of the pushback comes up. But, you know, it's like, you know, do you remember, some of the Heinlein books you mentioned? It was often about, like, Half Spacesuit Will Travel, I think. Was that the one with the boy who was a kid, goes into space? Or am I mixing that up?
No, that was one of them. And they also wrote another one called Citizen of the Galaxy that was very much like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been decades since I read those books, but I enjoyed them a lot because you can identify with the person. You get used to learning to identify with that person. And that was, you know, your typical kid, right? Not your typical action adventure hero. So I think now what we're seeing is, you know, taking that tilted playing board and trying to straighten it out a little bit. And ultimately, that's a good thing. I mean, overall, learning to empathize with people who aren't like you is, of course, I would say, a good thing.
I see what you're saying, and I agree with you. Oh, Courtney's going to say something. Go for it.
Am I unmuted?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. I cannot get the hang of the unmute thing. What I wanted to say is another thing I think why young boys are, you know, they don't read some of the more feminine characters or feminine driven stories is because a lot of toxic masculinity, they think it's not okay for them to read these stories and that they can't relate to them. And if they do relate to them, then they're going to be a sissy or a wimp or something. So I think it's important, like Diane said, to write for people and not just one specific gender, and to make people fall in love with these characters because of who they are as a person, not, you know, how they identify or anything like that. So I think, you know, it's really important to, I don't know, write balanced characters like you guys were saying.
And, you know, there's a long tradition of that in science fiction. Am I echoing?
Courtney is having some trouble with her, like she's got a delay with her mic mute, so she fixed it. Go on.
I was just going to say, I think there's a long tradition in science fiction of pushing the envelope, right? That's what science fiction is about. You know, are we trying new science, extrapolating science? Many science fiction writers, some of the best, extrapolate social structures as well as scientific structures into the future, or have the question, what if the social structures were different? Ursula Le Guin is a perfect example of that. And I think, you know, romantic relationships is part of that. How does it extrapolate into the future? You know, what if your loved one is cybernetic? What if you're exploring different sexualities? You know, as a teacher, I'm seeing a lot of students now asking questions about their own sexuality. You know, who is the person of interest? Are they gender different? You know, all these different questions that kids are facing now. You know, gay, lesbian, transgendered, all sorts of things. Science fiction has long explored those questions, as well as the questions of how would science be different. So I think the field is ready for new ideas. It just sometimes, you know, there's resistance. But I'm seeing a lot of interest in science fiction pushing the boundaries in that way as well.
I suppose the problem with me is that I grew up, my first reading in sci-fi was Isaac Asimov. And I'm not saying that he was a chauvinist in any way at all. But
no, it's okay. You can actually, because he admitted as much himself in his own writing. I just recently read Gold, which was a collection of his later stories and later essays, and he himself admitted that he had an erroneous position, which he changed as he got older. Yes, he was. He said right. So. Go on.
Thank you for that. I love his essays, but it occurred to me that my first reading was the Foundation trilogy, and then all the other Foundation books. And I realized that what was lacking in those, from my point of view, was the real relationship between characters until he got to the books where his guardian appeared, and her name is just escaping me. She was, as you probably remember, she was the cyborg, the robot. Sorry, she was a straight-out robot, and never aged, and looked after Hari Seldon until he realised what was happening, and there was a deep relationship between him and this female robot. And I think that Isaac Asimov had huge opportunities to develop the relationship between humans and artificial intelligence, which he didn't do. Not really.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you there. I found he did a few stories, and they were excellent stories about how robots wanted to be people, right? Wanted to be human.
Yes.
But not what that meant in terms of how they related to other people.
No. It was there, but it wasn't developed. And I know that when I read those books, as I said, they were my first modern science fiction reading. I felt that something was just slightly lacking, but I still admire. He's one of my models. He always will be. I think the most boring story he ever wrote was that one where it's called Pâté de foie gras. When he gives in the short story the whole chemistry of how you can actually get a goose to lay a golden egg. And he did the chemistry, and it was absolutely excellent, and one wonders why we don't have geese laying golden eggs. And that was the only piece of writing that actually bored me of Asimov. Nothing to do with romance, but
We apparently have bacteria now that produce golden nuggets. I just shared that link on my blog recently, so we're getting there.
Well, you know, I loved Asimov when I was a kid. The people that I started reading when I was like 3 or 4, you know, after I got through the little kids' books like Space Cat, I read Asimov, Heinlein, and Andre Norton. And, you know, when I was much, much older in graduate school, my mother said, "Do you know what? Isaac Asimov wrote a new book." And I said, "Oh, really?" And she said, "I'm going to send it to you for your birthday." I was very excited to get it. And now I'm kind of sorry I read it because, first of all, I couldn't take his presentation of the female characters. And I remembered then, oh yeah, I used to, in my mind, change the characters, not just of him, but of a lot of authors. I made the female characters, I'd make up extra stories in my mind while I was reading the book about their backstory, which made the stories more interesting to me. As an adult and a writer, reading his writing, you know, I saw the sexist subtext, and it was really hard for me because I had these fond memories of this author I read as a child and helped me love science fiction. And going back as an adult and seeing how he actually wrote kind of diminished that memory for me.
Yeah, that does sometimes happen. I agree with you there. Some things were better, and they were, well, not, I won't say better, but they were formative for you as a kid, and then you read them as an adult, and you know, they don't have the same luster they did then. But okay, so I think I'm going to shift the topic just slightly. I mean, we've been complaining about an absence of things. Let's talk about the positives of things. Why is it important to include romance as a central element in your stories? What do you think it adds that isn't otherwise present?
I'll bite on that one. I think for me, one of my big themes is transformation and personal growth. I mentioned before self-actualization. And to me, what romance brings to a story is that very frequently people need love, need to be able to make an intimate connection with another person in order to overcome their weaknesses, their essential weaknesses. Or to put it a different way, they have to overcome their essential weaknesses in order to have a healthy, loving relationship with another person or several other persons, however you want to pair it up. So to me, having the romance in there, having that aspect where somebody overcomes what's holding them back and forms that connection with someone else that's meaningful, that then helps them move forward, is pivotal to a story.
I agree with that thoroughly.
You know, it's funny. When I was writing, I never thought I'm adding a romantic relationship. It was just what I wrote. And when my first book came out and there was this, you know, large controversy about what's she doing putting romance in a science fiction hard SF novel, I was caught unawares because I didn't know I didn't know I was doing that. And I asked my agent about it one time. I said, you know, it's just love stories. Lots of science fiction has love stories in it. And she said, yeah, but it's how you write them. And to this day, I'm not exactly sure what I do different. You know, she said, like this relationship, this military commander, you know, dictator, has this relationship with this young girl who's a page, and she looks at him as her hero. And it's a very minor romantic subplot in the book. And it's about how he's never had someone who viewed him as a hero rather than a dictator. You know, it's not a big part of the book. She goes, that's romance. And I said, well, it's a love story. You know, a lot of science fiction books have that kind of plot line. And she said, yeah, but the way you tell it is identified as romantic as opposed to the love interest in traditional science fiction. And to this day, I could not tell you what that difference is. Maybe
I know what it is.
Yeah, go
It's
ahead.
that you're talking about emotions. When you talk about the difference in how romance is written than how science fiction or fantasy is written, it's when you talk about the emotions as opposed to like the actions or just the sex.
Also, I think power has to come into it. Science fiction is based very largely on power. But with romance, there comes a softening of that power, which I think is one of the very attractive things that can happen in science fiction.
I was going to say that I think part of it might be that you consider both sides, right? I read a lot of pulp fiction. I love it. So I've read a lot of Westerns. Another thing that I do is a fantasy weird Western thing, right? And when you're Krista pointed out that there's not a lot of Westerns anymore, and this is where, you know, men got their romance, right? So it's generally written from entirely the male point of view, and the female character is considered in regards to how she reacts to the male character, but there isn't a lot of thought given to what's going on with her, what's her backstory, what's her deal, you know, why is she involved in this relationship, right? So perhaps that's it.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense.
A point of view.
So I've written, I've talked a lot about in the past about other people are better at this topic, but female gaze versus male gaze, and I hate to bring that up because I know everybody who's watching this who knows me is rolling their eyes at me right now, so we'll very briefly cover it. But one of the things that we find is I use the Dresden Files as an example because I am the second biggest fan of the Dresden Files. I'm pretty sure Jim Butcher is a slightly bigger fan than me, but not much. And so I always say, I love the Dresden Files. It is male gaze and it is unapologetically male gaze. And I said, I think that's a great example. Whereas I look at Shannon Maguire's October Day. It is, if you look at story-wise, structure, romance, percentage, all of it, it's pretty close. But I have had in discussions where people have said, no, October Day is basically just romance. And Dresden is not romance at all. And I'm like, no. The difference is that you're used to how Harry talks about women on his side of the relationship. We are used, if we read certain books, we are used to the guy's perspective. And the woman is just, we understand that she's interacting, but we don't hear her feelings, her side, her going to her girlfriends and saying, you know, this is horrible, this is great, this is wonderful. And we don't hear her perspective ever. And so when we read a book that is basically the exact same story, but from her perspective, some people have said to me they found it overwhelming to see all of these female feelings and female sexuality. And I mean, it's practice. If we're not exposed to it, we're not used to it. And when I was a teenager, I went through a phase where I read nothing but assassin thriller novels. And then I went through a phase where I read nothing but romance novels. And then I went back to the assassin thriller novels, and they all had pretty much the same type of romance. It's just that one was from her perspective and sometimes his, and then one was only from his. And then we went back to her. And it's perspective, what we're used to. I think we're getting better at it, though. There's more access to more books. And like Courtney said, we're sometimes embarrassed. The toxic masculinity of being embarrassed to be exposed to it. E-readers are great for that because you don't have to show your cover. But also we're starting to encourage people, read the books. It's okay. All books are okay. It's all okay.
Mm-hmm. And I think today's audiences are much more open to it. You know, I grew up in the 1950s, and, you know, everything there was male gaze. Everything was, you know, valued the male protagonist to the point where you couldn't even have a discussion like this. So even though we still get a lot of pushback now, and we still find, you know, people are afraid to admit things they like because of social pressure, especially among young people, it's so much better than it was 50 years ago. You know, so we're still got a long way to go, but I've seen many positive developments in the portrayal of characters. You know, Daisy Ridley, nobody, it's not that she couldn't have existed 50 years ago. It's that almost nobody but us, you know, 10-year-old female nerds could even envision her existence as, you know, the lead in Star Wars.
So my husband had a question. He's watching in the background on his phone. He's disabled, so he's not going to type it in the chat, which, by the way, is always an option for if you're viewing live. There is a chat window. You can always ask questions in the chat window. I have it open so I can keep an eye on it. But okay, so his question is, and I have an answer for him too, but his question was, why can we not have romance? You know, that whole, okay, how do people feel? What is actually going on in the backstory? The actual, you know, motivations and the thoughts about the relationship. But why can't that sometimes be from the male perspective? That was his question.
Well, I think it often is. And certainly in straight up romance, there's a lot of romances that are told entirely from, like contemporary romance that are told entirely from the male point of view, or alternating male and female. And a lot of the books I write, the fantasy romances, I have both POVs.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, that's sort of what I have to say. Like, I think what he's looking for is the female gaze, right, from the male perspective. Right. That story that I mentioned in Chasing Fireflies, I did that. Right. My character, I mean, I did tell both sides of the relationship, but the main character of the series happens to be male, and that's a romance erotica story. That's absolutely what it is, and I wrote it from his perspective. So I do think it exists, but I'm not sure it's common to write in that way. I think that a lot of the times we apply our female gaze to female characters because we relate to female characters more often than not, right? But maybe, you know, but yeah, you can do it the other way. And if we're going to expand the perspective and teach people to, you know, read for this kind of thing too, maybe there's value in doing that, right? I'm not saying, oh, well, now we all have to write male characters or anything, but I'm saying that, you know, we can do that, right? Sure we can, and it does exist, and it's out there. Right?
I mean, a lot of my characters are male. I've written entire books. I would say more of my books have a female main character, but certainly it's not, you know, an overwhelming percentage. But writing, and I have male friends who are authors who say, well, I wrote it from the female's point of view. Why are women saying it's not the female point of view? The same way that sometimes men who write women men who read women who write from the male's point of view say it didn't feel like the male point of view to me. I think it's because there is a difference in how we see the opposite gender, the gender of interest, that varies depending on who's writing it. I've had men say to me, well, I read so-and-so and I don't believe her male characters. And I said, why not? Because I find them very believable. He said, they don't act the way I think men act. They don't think the way I think men think. And I realized after a while that we could perceive the same thing and attribute different responses to it, depending on how we perceive our place in you know, culture and society. So that, you know, if women perceive men differently, we may be writing about how they react to us and what they say to us that other men don't believe. You know, a lot of it has to do with your perception. And especially the perception of entitlement. There was implicit for years in fiction that the male character is entitled in ways that were subtle and not obvious to all readers. If a woman writes without that assumption, it's going to feel like it's not the typical point of view.
Yeah, I see what you're saying there. Yeah. I don't know. Like, I don't know. Does anybody else have anything to...
I like the idea very much of the male entitlement, because that is absolutely rife. It's almost a natural condition. And certainly I recognize it. Sometimes I question it. But it's there. The male is the figure who carries power. And the female, as somebody said earlier, goes along with that, or doesn't, or really isn't a character very much, a very strong character in her own right. But I don't try to escape that. I begin writing with that assumption that the male does carry power, but then I find, particularly in the books that I haven't put online, I find that the male does lose that strength and begins to go more deeply into his own journey. I'm a great believer in the hero's journey. I read Campbell, I don't well, uni, and I have a copy, a well-thumbed copy of the hero's journey, and I think it's a fascinating concept. I recognize it more in the male character than I do in the female character, which is a bad thing to say, but it's there. And I do my bit to build it in to the female character, but it's hard work.
Yeah. And then there's the... I mean, okay, and there's value in that, right? There's value in the hero's journey. I tend to write a lot of my characters from that perspective. I tend to relate to that very much because that's kind of the way my mind works. But other people's minds don't necessarily work that way. Sometimes there's value too in, like you said, the other side of the story, right? The one who goes along, right? Sometimes that's a valuable story too. And I expect, though, if I'm hearing from that character, eventually it's at some point, whether, I don't care what the gender of the character is, right? Whether the person who's going along, regardless, right, eventually they're going to reach a point where they stop reacting and start acting, right? Eventually, because I think that's a journey in and of itself. And it's something that I personally found I had to learn in my own life. And I think that most of us can relate to that, right? I can say that in my stories, the back characters always have a backstory, right? I always know what they're doing, even if I don't say it on the paper. The reason why I sometimes don't say it on the paper is because my books can be over 100,000 words long if I do. So I got to draw a line somewhere. But recently what I did is I took some of that stuff that I'd cut from the main series that I'm working on, and that grew into a story as it's actually going to be the one that's in that the On the Horizon book bundle. It's coming out in like a week. So and I'd be curious if you guys get a chance to read it. I'd be curious about your opinion, because this is what we're talking about, is the girl who was left behind. It's her story. It's what she did, right? So yeah. Whoop, sorry, just a sec.
I suppose my question is the girl who was left behind. I have written for young adults, but I tend now to look more at the mature woman with her particular backstory and try to explore how she adjusts to her particular circumstances, while at the same time developing a really good, psychologically good relationship with the person who carries the power. I realize that I haven't actually put any of my female characters as carriers of power. Not yet. Maybe that'll come later.
And we've reached the 7-minute lull. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe we've kind of talked that particular topic to death. All right, we are at just after 12, and we're only required to be here for an hour, ladies. But if you'll indulge me, there's one more topic that I'd like to address before we adjourn, right? And this is something that kind of got my blood boiling recently, and I'd yeah, I know, right? Here we go. I'm getting on my soapbox. Okay, so recently Amazon made some changes to the way in which it listed things, and I don't know exactly what the change was precisely. I understand Judith has been affected by it, so maybe she can offer us some more insight into the specifics. But what happened is they apparently randomly decided to reclassify a bunch of books out there that had been classified as romance as erotica, right? And erotica is handled differently on Amazon. They don't give you access to a bunch of promotions. They don't let you do things to get your book more in the public eye. Like there's things you're restricted from participating in, right? And but oddly, I understand they reclassified 50 Shades of Grey into holiday romance. I don't really understand how in the hell they can justify that, but they apparently have, right? And unfortunately, the rest of us, basically, you can't do book publishing these days without Amazon. It doesn't matter if you're a traditional small press or indie published author. You have to deal with Amazon whether you want to or not. They have a monopoly. So this has affected a lot of people who have no other option but then to suck it up, I guess. What happened to you, Judith? I'd love to hear about what exactly was done there.
About 5 years ago, I came across a retired publisher's editor said sex sells, because I'd asked him whether it would be all right to include an explicit sex scene in one of my books, and that was his response. So I thought, right, and I wrote a whole book about sex. So it's erotica. That's it. I don't know whether you can. Yeah, there you are.
That's a pretty cover.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's just a stock cover, but it is fantasy rather than sci-fi, and I enjoyed it. It's the only one that I've written, and I put it up on Amazon and CreateSpace. About 3 years later, Amazon sent me one of their curt messages that it had been removed because it didn't meet, quote, Amazon guidelines. I found it impossible to discover in what respect, I know the Amazon guidelines, but in what respect it transgressed against those guidelines, they did not say, they would not say. I worked it out that in its first publication, the protagonists were, one was a guardian and the woman was his cousin, a very young cousin. And I discovered that in some states in America, the sexual relationships between cousins, even to the extent of marriage, is legally forbidden. So I changed it, and they were no longer cousins, but just a guardian and a very distantly related woman, and it worked perfectly all right. But I tried to reinstate it on Amazon, but they wouldn't have it. It's as though they make up their mind and the algorithms have tied you up in a particular bundle, and that's where you stay. Now, I don't mind. It's an experience. It's up on Smashwords, and it's still on CreateSpace. I wrote to CreateSpace and asked if they were going to take it down. They said, no, leave it. So there's an inconsistency there, bearing in mind that CreateSpace is run by Amazon, but I didn't question it. The book has satisfied something in me. I won't write another one, but I like it. It's a well-written book, but I don't publish it under Judith Rook, so there's no confusion. between my sci-fi books and this particular one, but I enjoyed it, and the erotic part of it is quite tasteful. I've read some things that make me, make my toes curl, and go away and have a drink of coffee to clear my mind. It's nothing like that. It's just straightforward fantasy with detailed explanations of the sexual attraction between the two main characters. But anyway, that's my experience, and I suppose the problem is that I'm still feeling a little frustrated simply because Amazon will not communicate.
So they won't tell you why they took it down?
They will not. Oh, specifically, no. It's just the generic. It doesn't meet the Amazon guidelines, which to me is it's evidence, as somebody said, of somebody holding a monopoly.
A word to the wise, right? Those who are considering whether they should publish traditionally or independently. Amazon gives no Fs at all about any of their indie authors. They will not respond to you. They do not care. They do not care at all, right? They will often screw around small presses too. So there is an argument for getting a big press behind you, because they'll actually listen to them. Like, clearly they classified 50 Shades of Grey as holiday romance, so obviously they're listening to the big five, right? So yeah, there's something you should know, and I personally think it's immoral, and they offend me deeply by this. But
yes,
so I have the opposite of Judith's situation. So a couple of years ago, I had written a modern adaptation of Pride and Prejudice set in Edmonton inner city with an inner city worker. So there is a lot of anger and frustration, and it deals a lot with the darker side of Christianity in the role of nonprofit, because I used to actually work in that. So it is not Christian fiction. Amazon, they had told me later that it was their system who had tried to be helpful, took it out of romance and moved it into inspirational something. And like on the second page, it made a very irreverent comment that is not going to be found in inspirational anything. And I was bombarded. Like, I woke up, I didn't know what happened. I woke up the next morning and I had hate mail, of which, and I mean, I have gotten death threats in my life, and they weren't nearly as nasty as some of this stuff. Like, I was sending everybody to hell. I was the worst because I was causing people to sin. It was just awful. And I sent this frantic email to Amazon going, please, no, move me back. I need to go back where I was. And they were like, oh, well, we were trying to help. Don't help. Never help. Don't help me. So, and to this day, so I think the thing that moved 50 Shades of Grey into like the Christmas thing is the same system that moved me out of romance. I'm like, no, put it back. Put it back. Because for some of us, that's not helping us. And for Judith's situation, just as an aside, Judith, I actually recommend that you drop by K-Boards. So they have people who actually have had success getting back into the proper categories, and they might be able to help you. So you can contact me offline and I can get you the information.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I can speak a little bit to the recent stuff because RWA looked into it, and the reclassification is happening entirely according to BISAC codes, the BISAC codes, and keywords that you use for the books. So one way to get yourself reclassified is to change those codes. However, you do have to make sure that it matches your content. And yes, incest is a no-no. So even if it's just cousin stuff, they won't let you do it. But you can, as has been mentioned, you can get it reinstated. The other thing you can do is you can go through your Author Central page and call them. And if you call them and talk to somebody, you can get stuff altered. And finally, as a member of SFWA, one of SFWA's benefits is that we do have a direct liaison to Amazon, and you can ask to bring up issues with our Amazon liaison. And that's something definitely to take advantage of. But I can vouch as a hybrid author where I have books that are erotic that are both from the big five, or, well, I don't know if Harlequin counts as a big five, but my Harlequin books as well as my indie books have been impacted by the temporary rank stripping. I don't think that it's targeted at indies. I think they've done it across the board. And, you know, while 50 Shades of Grey is an easy target for people, really, if you've read the book, it's very much a gloss. There is, despite the salacious topic and all of the conversation, a whole lot of it's sexual tension, and there's not all that much that's actually graphic. So that's one reason. Part of it's because it sells super well, but also it does escape for those other reasons.
Thank you, that's useful.
Thank you. That's good to know. I'm sure that a lot of people are going to want to see this just for that piece of information. I'll probably timestamp it so people can find it. Great.
I'd also like to follow up on something Jeffy said about SFWA. SFWA has a lot of services that it offers authors. And, you know, there tends to be a little bit of tension between cross-genre authors who wonder if they will be accepted in SFWA. And there have been some controversies which got a lot of attention in SFWA. And as a past president, I would like to say that 95% of what goes on is like Jeffy was talking about. They offer this service to authors, the direct connection to Amazon or an Amazon representative that we have. It's very definitely worth looking into. Please, for romance authors who are looking at cross-genre opportunities, don't count SFWA out because you've heard about the controversies. That isn't the main part of what SFWA is or does. SFWA being the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America.
And we even have a romantic interests sub-forum on the main SFWA forums. So, and it's semi-private. Anyone can join it, but you have to ask to join it, and you can just ask me and I can get you on it. But if you want to talk about romance in science fiction and fantasy without feeling self-conscious, that's a good place to do it.
Yeah, and there's the fantasy, what's the name of that group? Fantasy and paranormal, right? Fantasy,
futuristic, and paranormal subchapter of RWA. It's an online chapter, FFP.
Yeah, that's going the other way.
Yeah,
yeah, they're good too.
You know, there's just the fence is a very, very fine fence. You can jump across all the time. That's fine.
Yeah, Swiss cheese.
Yes.
Yeah, why count yourself out on either side, right? I agree completely.
And I have to say to the science fiction writers out there who want to be accepted in romance, don't expect it just to come automatically. You got to respect the genre.
Yeah, it works both ways, doesn't it? Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, all of you, for joining the panel today. Do you guys have any final thoughts or anything you'd like to mention about what you're currently working on or what's coming out in the near future before we say goodbye here?
If you're in Calgary, I'll be at Calgary Expo all weekend coming up. And I'll be giving the talk on What Kings Ate, as I do every year. So you come on by Hall at D, and I'll run up and down the hallways for an hour.
Well, I'm going to be the guest of honor, author guest of honor at the Baltimore, the Balticon, which is put on by the Baltimore Science Fiction Fantasy Writers. Last weekend in May, you can look it up online, Balticon. I think it's .org. It might be .com. Also, I'm appearing in San Francisco. Balticon, by the way, is on the East Coast near Baltimore. I'm also appearing in San Francisco on Saturday, May, I think it's 28th is the Saturday. It's that weekend. at Borderlands Books. And I'll post this on my Facebook page so that it has all the information and directions and stuff.
We don't tend to go in for that sort of conference in Australia simply because there's so few of us, I think. And I really envy people who are going to go to this sort of event. I would love it. However, I must say that I am going to go to see a presentation by Charlie Duke, one of the people who walked on the moon. He'll be in Perth in May, and I am so looking forward to that. I'm thrilled to bits. But that's not to do with sci-fi, that's science reality.
Anybody else got anything coming up they'd like to mention?
I'll be at SFWA's Nebula weekend in Pittsburgh in May. I'll be on some panels at that and signing at the mass autographing. And then my next release is Prisoner of the Crown, which comes out on June 12th.
Fantastic. And what's happening in Courtney's world? Courtney's having trouble with her mute button again.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good. I'm a cover reveal very soon. I'm probably in the next 2 weeks.
Uh-oh.
Cannot wait to show it to everybody. I think Diane's already saw it on our little author chat, but I'm really excited to get that out there and get a pre-order up for really, I mean, besides my short stories, my first actual book. So excited about that. I don't have any cons or anything to mention, but it's been a long journey for me just to get that done.
Could you give the title again? I missed it.
Yeah.
It's called Forget Me Not Bloodlines. It's like it's an origin story of where my main novel that's coming out in August. It's kind of like the backstory for that. I'm kind of going to release that first so people know what's going on and then kind of lead into the book. It's going to be a standalone. It's a nice little introduction to the world to give everybody first.
Well, congratulations. It's awesome.
Thank you.
I don't know what else Judith has on her plate, but I do know that she and I, like we've said before in the podcast, our books are going to be part of a book bundle that's going to be available May 1st. It's available for pre-order now. It's On the Horizon, Simple Worlds of Speculative Fiction, or Speculative Adventure, pardon me. It's spearheaded by a lovely guy named S.A. Gibson, and we're both going to have they're all full-length novels, minimum 40,000 words. So we've got that coming out right away, and I'm very excited about it. I'm very frustrated with the formatting, but otherwise, everyone's like, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
I know we have one listener because my daughter just sent me a text and said, Mom, you got the date right for the Borderlands. It's April 28th, not May 28th. It's this coming weekend that I'm appearing. The Balticon thing is the third weekend of May.
Okay, and I feel like a moron, but what is the date? I should know this. What is the date of the Nebula Conference? Because people are going to want to know that. This is the SFWA channel.
Yes.
Uh-oh, Jeffy's running away. She has to look it up, too.
I had to look at my calendar. It's going to be May 15th through that weekend.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
That's great.
And Pittsburgh, and people could still register. So, and then we're doing something a little different this year, that we're doing the mass autographing on Sunday afternoon, and that's totally open to the public. So if people are in the area at all, come on down and say hi.
Well, I envy you all. Wish you all the best for it.
You know, Judith, while we're talking, Australia RWA is a big group, and they do conferences there, and there's a lot of people who are in the SFF subgenres. You might check them out.
Yes, I am a member of the RWA.
Okay.
Yes, I was just talking to Diane before we began that I've actually been a member almost by default for a number of years, because I made one of those arrangements to have my membership renewed through PayPal. So yes, I'm still a member, which is nice.
And I should clarify that the mass autographing is on Sunday, May 20th, to be precise.
Yes, thank you. That's great. That's very cool. If I were anywhere near the area, I would definitely go.
There's going to be amazing people signing. So
yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I'm just going to say a few words about things coming up on the channel before we part ways. And the first thing is, if you're interested in the Nebula Conference, you've never been, you'd like to see what's going on, I have a video of the 2016 Nebula Awards, which of course are presenting for the 2015 calendar year. That will be up in the next few days. And I think it's a really wonderful way to see what happens and why you would want to go, and you know, all the stuff that's involved, and I encourage you to check that out. I thought it was very eye-opening because I've never been to the Nebula Conference. And coming up on our talk programs, the next topic for the panel will be steampunk. That will be happening sometime in early May, but I'm not sure when because everybody's making arrangements around the conferences. I could end up with 2 back-to-back, 1 week and then the next week near the end of the month shows. I'm not sure, but I'm trying for the beginning of May. We have most of the panels sorted out now. I'm excited. It's going to be fun. I have a soft spot for steampunk, so. And then the next episode of Spec Women Chat is going to be everybody's favorite bugaboo, strong female characters. So we will be doing that near the end of May. Thank you so much, ladies, for joining me, and thank you to our viewers. This is actually the channel and the podcast are growing. We had our largest on live viewership, which was we had a dozen viewers at one point. We currently have 9, right, who are watching live. We usually get somewhere between 50 and 100 views afterwards so far. So share it around so that people can see it. It will build over time, but we are just getting it going. My husband wanted to say thank you very much as well to all of you. He's really enjoyed the show. He's been watching the live broadcast, so he said you guys were great. So, and we'll see you all next time on Spec Women Chat. Have a great afternoon, everybody, or
Thank
evening,
you.
or morning,
Yes.
depending on where you are.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.